Yes, I think that's fine.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Gil Klein. I'm the club's president and a national correspondent for Media General newspapers, writing for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Tampa Tribune, and the Winston-Salem Journal. I'd like to welcome the club members in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching us on C-SPAN or listening to us on National Public Radio or the Internet Global Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming events. On Tuesday, tomorrow, Bill Malden, the cartoonist, will speak in conjunction with the National Portrait Gallery exhibit, Reporting the War, the journalistic coverage of World War II, saluting war correspondents who covered the war. The luncheon, originally scheduled for Wednesday with Senator Bill Bradley, has been rescheduled for Wednesday, May 11th, due to the National Day of Mourning for President Nixon. And on Thursday, April 28th, Lee Brown, Director of the National Office of Drug Policy, will talk about drugs and the future of our children, a call to action. Transcripts and audio and videotapes are available for this luncheon by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for our speaker, and I certainly trust that you will, please write them on the cards provided for you at your tables and pass them up to the head table, and I will ask as many as time allows. I'd like now to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when I read their names. Please withhold your applause until the names are read. From your right is Tom Donlan of Barron's, Nancy Dunn of Financial Times, C.H. Tom, U.S. correspondent, Radio Television, Hong Kong, Susan Brink, U.S. News and World Report, George Watson, Senior Contributing Editor of ABC News, Barry Wiggum, Commissioner for Hong Kong to the United States. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, we have Christy Wise, freelance journalist and chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, Jeremy Greenstock, Minister of the British Embassy, Jean-Louis Arcand, Director of U.S. Operations, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Ken Jacobson, Editor, New Technology Week, Jim Berger, Trade Reports International, and Simon Beck, South China Morning Post. I'd also like to thank staff members Melissa Bender, Pat Thornsberry, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Jeff Tarbell for arranging today's luncheon. Now, usually, when we have a speaker from Hong Kong, it is the British governor appointed by the Queen. Today, we have Anson Chan, the Chief Secretary of Hong Kong, who is the first Chinese to hold this post. She represents the change that is about to happen to Hong Kong. In just 3 years, the British end their 99-year rule of Hong Kong, and administration of it reverts to the Chinese government. It may well be Mrs. Chan who will have to deal with the Chinese authorities and with Hong Kong's new relationship to Beijing. Mrs. Chan was born in Shanghai, and when her father died, leaving 8 children, her mother took the sons to Great Britain to be educated and left the daughters to be raised by a grandmother. She was an English literature student planning to be a social worker when she read a classified ad in a newspaper 31 years ago looking for an administrative assistant in the Hong Kong government. The rest, as they say, is history. She has served in key positions in finance, economics, commerce, and industry, and social services. Now she holds the most senior post in Hong Kong's civil service. She comes to us today at a very important point in Hong Kong's history. This city-state has risen to be one of the most influential commercial centers of Asia. 2/3 of China's trade with the United States, and 1/3 of it coming back the other way, flow through Hong Kong. With a population of less than 6 million people, Hong Kong employs another 3 million Chinese who come to the city from neighboring Chinese territory. Hong Kong's immediate problem, therefore, is what happens if President Clinton decides in June to cut off China's most favored nation status because of human rights abuses. Last week, we had a debate here between Senator Max Baucus and Representative Nancy Pelosi that looked at both sides of that issue from the United States' perspective. Mrs. Chan can give us the perspective from the other side of the Pacific. In the long run, Hong Kong faces graver problems after July 1st, 1997. Already, the Chinese government is protesting the growing movement in Hong Kong for a more representative government. It is no accident that China's most often quoted curse is, "May you live in interesting times." But there is another Chinese saying, "In chaos, there is opportunity." Mrs. Chan obviously is looking at the opportunity as she comes to the United States to encourage U.S. business to invest even more in Hong Kong as a gateway to increased China trade and investment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm press club welcome for Anson Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Klein, for your introduction. I know that the last speaker from Hong Kong was none other than our governor, Chris Patten. I can certainly not compete with Chris Patten in his breadth of knowledge, in his wit, and in his wisdom and humor. But I think I can claim age and perhaps beauty. I know that the press is all-powerful, particularly the press here in the States. But I hadn't realized that your power extends to ordaining the weather. But thank you for this delightful and magnificent weather that we're having. It helps to make my trip to Washington, my second one, so much more enjoyable. Thank you. I think it is right that I begin today's address by paying a brief but heartfelt tribute to the late President Nixon. On our side of the Pacific, he will always be remembered for his statesmanship and in particular for having the courage and vision to start down the road to normalization of U.S. relations with China. This paved the way for China to embark on its open door policy and economic reforms and facilitated the negotiation of all the safeguards surrounding the return of Hong Kong to Chinese sovereignty. Being an appointed rather than an elected official, I'm not due to retire until the year 2000. You can work out from that how old I am. So I hope I may have the opportunity to talk to you again between now and then. Though I think I should put down a marker that I will not be available on 30th of June 1997, as I already have something penciled in my diary for that date. I would like to talk to you today about the importance of Hong Kong and its future after 1997. Not simply why it is important to me or to the 6 million others like me for whom it is home, but why it is, or why it should be, important to Americans and to the world. I think there are 3 reasons. The most obvious one is economic. Hong Kong's importance in international trade, finance, and business services. Secondly, Hong Kong's prosperity contributes to stability in the historically volatile East Asian region. And thirdly, Hong Kong stands for important international values, for clean, fair government, the rule of law, international standards of human rights and freedom, and a firm stand against corruption. Let me take economics first. We are a tiny place, 89th in terms of the world's population, and yet we are the world's 8th largest trading economy. And we buy more United States goods and services per head than anyone else in Asia or in Europe. As well as being a good market in our own right, we are the gateway for business with China, the conduit for 2/3 China's exports to the United States and 1/3 of US exports to China. most United States companies doing business with China do so through Hong Kong. And it is not only our Guangdong neighboring province that I'm talking about here. Hong Kong's business links extend to all parts of China. Dalian, in northeast China, does not call itself the Hong Kong of the North for no reason. Hong Kong has over 60% of all the outside investment in Dalian. And this is the case all over China, where Hong Kong can offer US business a well-established network of contacts and joint venture partners. We are not only a gateway to China, but also a business base for the entire East Asia region. 70% of American firms with Far East headquarters have them in Hong Kong. They are there because of our central geographical position, because of our excellent communications, because of our free port, our low taxes, our sound legal system, and our level playing field for all businesses, regardless of their country of origin. So US companies do not come to Hong Kong only to do business with China, but to do business with Southeast Asian countries, with Korea, and with Japan. And they are coming now to Hong Kong to investigate the possibilities in nearby Vietnam. Hong Kong is the leading investor in Vietnam, with more projects there than anyone else. And we are well positioned to be the ideal springboard to Vietnam over the coming years, just as we have been for China ever since it's opened its doors to foreign business. This brings me on to my second point about Hong Kong's importance, its contribution to stability in the East Asian region. American policy has long recognized that prosperity helps create stability. American aid, trade, and investment helped rebuild Western Europe and Japan after World War II. It helped create the conditions for stability and for democracy in those countries. American trade and investment has helped Hong Kong, itself shattered by the war, to prosper. Now the challenge is to extend that achievement to other countries, to the countries of Eastern Europe, to Russia, China, and Vietnam. Just as Hong Kong is America's business partner in East Asia, so Hong Kong can and does contribute to the political objective actively shared by the United States of making the region more stable. A region that has seen more of its fair share of instability over the years. And now, of course, North Korea has the world worried once again. A prosperous China, a stable China, will be critical to long-term stability in the entire East Asian region. Hong Kong makes a huge contribution to that objective, with 2/3 of all foreign investment in China. And Hong Kong investment elsewhere is playing its part to help build a prosperous and stable region. We believe that greater prosperity leads to greater stability. It reduces the risk of conflict in the region. It reduces the incentives for migration, which has been such a colossal problem for both Hong Kong and the United States. And to touch on another issue of great concern to us both, it reduces the incentives for narcotics trafficking. And prosperity and stability together create the conditions for better, more open government. This brings me to my third reason for Hong Kong's importance in the world, namely the value that it represents. Hong Kong stands for good, clean government. It has a record of fighting corruption that is second to none. We live by the rule of law. Everyone, from the mightiest taipan to the man who drives the peak tram, is equal under the law. We live by international standards of human rights and freedoms. We are an open society, a free society. We have long enjoyed the rights and freedoms associated with democracy, even though for historical reasons we have not had the formal institutions of democracy in Hong Kong. We have the freedom to think and to say what we think. We have the same kinds of rights under the law as in Europe, as in Australia, as in Japan, and as you have here in the United States. And so, 3 reasons why Hong Kong is important. 3 reasons why it is important that Hong Kong should survive. But, you might ask, will it survive? 7 or 8 years ago, when Hong Kong governors or my predecessors as chief secretaries gave speeches in Washington or elsewhere in the world, they faced a good deal of skepticism about Hong Kong's future. The Sino-British Joint Declaration has just been signed. It said that when Hong Kong reverted to Chinese sovereignty in 1997, it would have its own government, which would not include officials sent down from Peking. That it would have its own laws, its own courts, currency, international trade agreements, passports, and so on. In short, that it would continue to function in almost every way, much as it had done for many years, as a Milton Friedman role model of free market capitalism. At that time, the world's press and international audiences had some trouble believing that this arrangement, 1 country, 2 systems, would really work. And many people were predicting that well before 1997, say in 1994 or so, Hong Kong would be running downhill. Prophecy is always a tricky and dangerous business, as anyone looking at Hong Kong in 1994 can testify. Hong Kong today is in very good shape. Our GDP is twice what it was then. We are now better off per capita than Britain, Canada, or Australia. Our stock market capitalization is overtaking Paris and Frankfurt. Our container port is the busiest in the world, growing at the rate of 1 Seattle per year. Our financial secretary in his recent budget was able, for the 2nd successive year, to cut taxes, raise spending, and increase our already robust fiscal reserves. This has happened because Hong Kong has had confidence in itself. Businessmen have kept investing in Hong Kong, and international business has continued to find that there is no better place to base itself in Asia and no better way to do business in China. It isn't just a matter of business confidence. Hong Kong public opinion generally is much less jittery than it was in the 80s, and particularly at the turn of the decade in the aftermath of Tiananmen. When China and Britain argued in the 1980s, and they did argue then too, public opinion in Hong Kong became extremely nervous. Now it is different. In spite of the failure of last year's negotiations over electoral arrangements and some very sharp public statements from China, public confidence generally has held up remarkably well. This is partly because the economy has been strong, and the economy has led many of those who emigrated to Canada, Australia, and the United States in less confident times to return to work in Hong Kong. But it is also in good measure because people who have more say in the way they are governed become more confident about their future. The development of more representative government has contributed to this. Our first direct elections to the legislature were held in 1991. The increasing localization of the senior posts in government has been another element. I and most of the other cabinet-level officials in the government are Hong Kong Chinese. We are committed to Hong Kong now, and we are committed to Hong Kong beyond 1997. Of course, confidence alone is not enough. We have to work hard to ensure that our confidence is well-founded. And we are doing that in each of the 3 areas that I outlined at the start of my speech. We are continuing to invest in our future as the premier international business center in East Asia. We are constantly upgrading Hong Kong's physical, educational, and business infrastructure. We are building new port facilities, new roads, new railways. We are also building a new airport, which will have the capacity to become the world's busiest. Yes, we are building it, even though we still have to agree with the Chinese over the financing arrangements for the airport. More than half the dredgers in the world are working around the clock in Hong Kong to get the job done. And I have not the slightest doubt that it will be done. I might add that American money and know-how is making a significant contribution to this effort, which I saw described in one Australian newspaper as the biggest single construction project since the building of the pyramids. Hong Kong investment continues to pour into China and other parts of East Asia. And investment from China and elsewhere continues to pour into Hong Kong. This is creating a massive common interest in prosperity and stability. China's interest in a prosperous and stable Hong Kong has never been greater than it is now. We are also working hard to preserve and to strengthen the values that have been so important to Hong Kong's success. That, in essence, was what our recent argument with China over electoral reform was all about. We know that if the rule of law is eroded, if we allow corruption to seep into our system, if individual liberties are undermined, if government becomes more opaque, more bureaucratic, then we shall lose everything. We shall lose the way of life that we cherish, and we shall lose our attraction as an international business center. If businesses feel that the level playing field is being tilted against them by unseen hands, and here I do not refer to Adam Smith's invisible hand moving the market, they will go elsewhere. So we will not let that happen. Our highest priorities, my highest priorities as Chief Secretary, and the priorities of all of us who want our future in Hong Kong after 1997 to be every bit as bright as our present, are to maintain the rule of law, to maintain the strongest possible safeguards against corruption, to maintain individual rights and freedoms, and to maintain clean, open, and efficient government. The Joint Declaration and the Basic Law guarantees our way of life in Hong Kong for 50 years after 1997. They promise, for example, that our economic, financial, and social systems will continue as they are, that the Hong Kong dollar will remain freely convertible, property rights and foreign investments will be protected, we will continue to operate as a free port and customs territory, and conduct our own commercial relations with the rest of the world, that there will continue to be freedom of movement of goods and capital and people, freedom of assembly, speech, and worship, and the English common law system and an independent judiciary. That is the promise, and I am determined to do all I can to see that it is delivered. There are, of course, still cynics who say that all good things must come to an end. But like many United States businessmen active in Hong Kong, I prefer Mae West's philosophy that too much of a good thing can be wonderful. What can Americans do to help secure Hong Kong's future? There is something that the United States can do immediately, and that is renew unconditionally most favored nation status for China. If MFN is not renewed, Hong Kong will receive an economic body blow given the increasingly close economic links between China and Hong Kong. A conservative estimate of what this would mean is the loss of up to $24 billion worth of trade and some 75,000 jobs, which is about 3% of our total workforce. This would seriously undermine our economic strength just when we need it most. I have heard it suggested that some middle road is feasible between renewal and non-renewal of MFN, some form of selected or targeted non-renewal. Let me say bluntly that this is a delusion. Quite apart from the practical difficulties in attempting to distinguish between goods produced by state and non-state enterprises, for example, which is one of the suggestion of selective targeting, there are considerable risks. China is in the process of moving from a central command economy to a market-oriented one. Reform of state enterprises is a key and difficult part of this. Sanctions, selective or otherwise, will not help to ensure that the process of reform is an orderly one. It is also worth bearing in mind that whilst the United States buys mainly from non-state enterprises, it is the state enterprises which buy most from the United States. Lastly, the introduction of any trade sanctions, however selective, creates uncertainty. In particular, it would create uncertainty for Hong Kong because it simply is not possible to insulate Hong Kong from the effects of sanctions against China. This uncertainty would damage confidence at the very time that we need it most, just 3 years before the change of sovereignty. The task of preparing for the transition has not been easy and will not be easy. We have had our differences in the past with the Chinese, and no doubt there will be differences in the future. So far, we have managed well, largely because we continue to enjoy healthy growth. And this, in turn, hinges largely on robust growth in China. As for human rights in China, nowhere on earth are people more concerned about that than in Hong Kong, where a sixth of the population took to the streets in their anxiety after the Tiananmen events in 1989. But our own experience shows that it is in the more prosperous parts of China that people are increasingly able to make choices about their lives that used to be made for them by others. Prosperity and greater freedom of choice will of themselves help to protect and ensure human rights much more effectively than economic threats from abroad can ever do. There is a more general way in which the United States and the rest of the world can help Hong Kong secure its future. That is, by continuing to treat us now and beyond 1997 as you have treated us in the past. As valuable trading partners, as an excellent investment opportunity, as valued participants in international fora, as reliable partners in the battles against narcotic traffickers, commercial fraud, organized crime, and alien smuggling. Continue to do business with us, because it will be business as usual. Continue to allow us to travel to and from the United States as freely as we do now. Hong Kong will benefit, and America will benefit too. In short, we ask that you believe in our future as we believe in our own future. In fact, Americans obviously do believe in us. 900 United States firms, $9 billion worth of United States investment, and 26,000 Americans living in Hong Kong can't be wrong. But there is always room for more. The United States' commitment to Hong Kong today is second only to the commitment of Hong Kong people themselves. We are grateful for that, and we believe that given such commitment, Hong Kong will continue well into the next century to be as important to you and to the world as it is now. Let me thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again for allowing me this privilege to address you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chan. That was excellent. I have a lot of questions have been coming up, and so I'll get right to them. As you pointed out, no one has more stake in human rights in China than the Hong Kong people. But we should not link it to most favored nation. How should the United States protest human rights violations in China, if not through linkage with most favored nation status?
As I have made clear in my speech, we entirely share, we applaud American moral leadership in championing human rights and in respect for human rights. But we do not believe MFN as a trade tool to be the right tool to achieve those objectives. We have seen for ourselves, particularly in Hong Kong, that the places in China that are most open, that have more of a choice for its people, greater prosperity, economic prosperity, is in fact in Guangdong and in places like Shanghai, where they have enjoyed economic growth. They have had very strong growth because of trade with the United States, with Hong Kong, with the rest of the world. And it is in these places that they are able more and more to have more of a choice in the way that they choose to live. And we believe that by continuing those links, by facilitating trade, by a continuous constructive dialogue and engagement with China, and in that way, the ability for Americans and for all those who believe in free trade to influence thinking in China, that would be the best way of securing human rights.
Does that mean then that the United States should not protest in any way the human rights violations?
Not at all. I believe and I emphasize that we continue to feel that it is good, and we remain convinced that America should continue to draw attention to their concern for human rights, for the respect of the individual, for the basic freedoms that we in Hong Kong and the rest of the free world take for granted. But there are other ways of achieving this. By all means, continue to, lecture and to draw attention to this. But trade is not the effective tool. I think trade sanction, in my view, has never worked. If you look at China, in the years 1950 to about 1970, that coincided with the embargo against trade with China imposed by the United States, those were possibly the most repressive years. And we have seen in Guangdong that people are freer if you impose trade sanctions and the Chinese retaliate. That will make it much more difficult for the more moderate, the more reform-minded people to push for reforms in China. I think that the hardliners will then be in the ascendancy. That will be bad for China. It will certainly be bad for Hong Kong, and it will be bad for the United States and the rest of the world, certainly also in terms of stability in the East Asian region.
What, if anything, has the Hong Kong government done to influence China to push for human rights improvements so that President Clinton can or will be able to renew MFN with a clear conscience?
I think the question of human rights and how far the Chinese must perform in order to enable President Clinton to extend MFN is largely a matter between the United States and China. I think what I can say is that we attach considerable importance to human rights. We constantly, through our businessmen going up to China, doing business with China, through other informal channels, impress upon the Chinese respect for the individual, that human rights is a concern that is not just shared by America, but shared by the rest of the world. People believe and push for human rights because human rights is something that is basic to human freedom and is the cornerstone of democracy all over the world. And if China, as it will in years to come, become an economic power, then it must learn to live by the rules of the game. And part of the rules of the game is respect for the individual, respect for freedom of all types.
What kind of electoral reform is going on now in Hong Kong? Governor Patton's electoral reforms. You tell us what is going on and do you take seriously China's pledge to reverse all of these electoral reforms upon assuming sovereignty in 1997?
I think most of you will be aware that when Governor Patton arrived in Hong Kong in his first address at the opening of the new session of our Legislative Council, he announced a package of constitutional reforms. This package contained proposals which were designed to put flesh to the principle that was laid down in the Basic Law as regards how the legislature will be formed, the first legislature in the new SAR government after 1997. And the Basic Law made it quite clear that the legislature will be formed by means of election. Now, of course, it did not spell out how elections will be conducted, in what form. We have, of course, begun a process of evolutionary development of representative government since the mid-1980s. And in 1991, we had our first direct election to the legislature. So the package of constitutional reforms, far from, as described in certain quarters, as Governor Patton's wish to push for democracy, did nothing of the sort. It simply just attempted to implement the principle that was laid down in the Basic Law. It has been obvious to us that, particularly since the events of Tiananmen, the people in Hong Kong have themselves felt that there was a need for better safeguards, that there was a need for a representative government to develop more quickly and for them to have more of a say in the way in which they have governed. So the package of proposals that the governor put forward were, in our view, entirely consistent with our understanding with the Chinese, entirely consistent with the Basic Law, was what the community wanted. It had been debated 3 times in our Legislative Council and on each and every occasion received majority support. The Chinese, as you know, intensely disliked the package. They claimed that it infringed the understanding between the 2 sovereign powers, that it was inconsistent with the Basic Law, and there follow some very, very difficult months during which there were words, particularly personal attacks on the governor. We believe that it was important to, as it were, engage the Chinese in a series of discussion in order to try and reach agreement exactly on the content of the constitutional package. The reason for this is very simple. The community of Hong Kong, with the reversion of sovereignty to China in 1997, obviously wish to see the 2 sovereign powers cooperating. They wish to be ensured that there will be continuity in the constitutional arrangements after 1997. So we made every effort possible to sit down at the negotiating table with China to negotiate a package that both sides can accept. Our only bottom line was that in the final package, we insisted that the elections should be conducted in a fair and open manner acceptable to the people of Hong Kong. We were also very anxious, as part of this agreement on the package, to secure what we describe in local parlance as the through train arrangements. For those of you who are not familiar with the through train, it is simply an arrangement whereby those who were elected during the 1995 elections can serve out their full 4-year term, which means 2 years after sovereignty reversed to China. We felt that continuity was important. Indeed, the whole joint declaration is predicated on the need for continuity, continuity in our way of life, continuity in the civil service. So we believe that we were reflecting community views in trying to secure through-train arrangements. There then followed 18 rounds of talks, about 160 hours of talks, during which we made every effort possible to reach agreement. But alas, we did not succeed. We had a real time constraint because we have elections coming up in 1994 and elections coming up in 1995, and time simply had just run out. So, in the absence of agreement, we reluctantly had to push ahead. We have now already pushed through and enacted 2 pieces of legislation connected with the 1994-95 elections. The third one is just going through our Legislative Council. It is being debated. The governor has made it quite clear that the final package will be the package that the Legislative Council themselves will feel able to support. And of course, in securing that support, they will undoubtedly ensure that the package in its final form is fair and open and acceptable to the people of Hong Kong. Now, the Chinese have said that in the absence of agreement on the constitutional package, they will have nothing to do with it. They disown it, and they will dismantle all 3 tiers of government come 1st of July 1997. We hope very much that the Chinese will have regard to the fact that this package, as I described, does not in any way go against the understanding that we have reached with the Chinese, that it is fully consistent with the Basic Law, that we are doing no more than to meet the principle laid down in the Basic Law about an orderly evolutionary development of representative government. We hope that if the Chinese can see for themselves after the 1994 and 1995 elections, that these elections have been conducted in accordance with the people's wishes, that they are seen to be working, and we have no doubt that they will work, then they will not see a need to dismantle all three tiers of representative government come 1st of July 1997.
Following up on that, this questioner asks, after 99 years of colonial rule, aren't the British government's efforts toward representative government in Hong Kong merely intended to give China a hard time?
Not at all. I often hear the comment, isn't it hypocritical of the British to introduce democracy in the last few remaining years of their rule? I think there are several factors that perhaps I ought to draw attention to. The first is that there is a change of sovereignty. In place of Britain and parliamentary democracy, sovereignty is reverting to China. And although China is making progress in economic reforms and on other fronts, it is nevertheless still largely a communist socialist state. So that's the first point. Second point is that Hong Kong people have enjoyed consistent, strong economic growth. Our standard of living has increased by leaps and bounds in past decades. And it is, in my view, very natural that as people's standard of living improves, their aspirations increase. They want more of a say in the way in which they have governed. And as I drew attention to earlier, particularly following the Tiananmen events, there was a very, very strong depth of feeling amongst the community that they want more safeguards, that they would like government to move ahead on this evolutionary development of representative government. So the British government is doing no more than what the people of Hong Kong want. We cherish the freedoms that we currently have. These freedoms are essential to the people in Hong Kong. They are the ingredients for our success. They are the ingredients for the fact that we are now a preeminent business, financial, and services center. And to maintain that way of life and to give us the prosperity that will, I think, in the end, justify China's confidence in Hong Kong and China's belief that Hong Kong can indeed assist China in its open door policy, then we must move along this road. The government, at the end of the day, must do what it believes to be right. The mere fact that the Chinese have threatened to dismantle this is not, in my view, a reason for not attempting to do the best for the people of Hong Kong. If the British do not do that, I do not think they will be forgiven by the people of Hong Kong.
There has been a lot of movement of Hong Kong people, especially businessmen. A lot of them left in the 80s. They went to Canada. Now I understand they're coming back because of the booming economy there. Do a high percentage of Hong Kong officials and businessmen have they arranged dual citizenship and, as a hedge against what happens when the Chinese government take over? And how many have left and are coming back?
I don't really think I'm in a position to comment on that. The government does not make it a business to know who holds what passports. What I can say is that following Tiananmen, when there was a very, very sharp fall in confidence, and there was indeed a vast exodus of people going to America, to Australia, to Canada, and whatnot, the government felt it necessary, in order to anchor people in Hong Kong, to devise a scheme whereby they would give British passports to Hong Kong people. They allowed 50,000 households to be eligible to apply for British passport. Now, people in Hong Kong see foreign passports, seek foreign passports, not necessarily because they wish to leave Hong Kong straight away and settle overseas, but they see it very much as an insurance policy, something that they might be able to fall back on in case something drastic happens in Hong Kong. And this British passport, nationality passport scheme, I think has on the whole worked very well. We have seen very few people leaving for the United Kingdom. And because of our booming economy, and also because, relatively speaking, economies in Canada and Australia have done less well, we have in recent years, in fact, seen more people coming back to work in Hong Kong. At the peak of our emigration rate, we had something like 66,000 people leaving every year. Last year, I think it's reduced to 53, and we think that in future it's likely to stabilize possibly just under 60,000.
This questioner would like to know, what effect will China's influence with the North Korean government have on the United States' decision on MFN, and is Hong Kong concerned about North Korea's alleged development of nuclear weapons?
I think Hong Kong shares the Americans and indeed the rest of the world's concern about nuclear proliferation. I'm sure that people in America must be concerned about the situation in North Korea. We all have an interest in regional stability. And as I said in my speech, East Asia has not exactly been known for its stability. So anything that can be done to improve stability is good for America, for China, for Hong Kong, and for the rest of the world.
You mentioned in your speech the narcotics trade and how both governments can work on it. What is the flow of narcotics? How is it working between that's going through Hong Kong? What can the United States do to help the Hong Kong government?
I think we have a very good cooperation with the United States authorities on stopping narcotics smuggling. I can't, of course, describe the detailed arrangements, but I think on the whole that has worked very well. We take very seriously our obligations, and we enforce our obligations very, very strictly. And I think on the whole we have been able, I can't claim that we have been able to stem completely, but I think we have been able at least to contain narcotic smuggling, and we can assure your administration that we will continue to cooperate with enforcement authorities all over the world in stopping the trafficking of drugs, which is so damaging for people all over the world.
Now, I'm told that the economies of South China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan exceed those of the European Economic Community. Is that true? And if so, do you see Hong Kong as an economic capital of this whole region, then, that it would include Taiwan?
I think if I recollect OECD forecast growth figures correctly, the East Asian region is estimated to be the region of fastest growth, certainly much faster than growth in the OECD country. Intra-regional trade certainly is growing. We see Hong Kong as playing a pivotal part, not only because of our geographical locality and our strategic position, but also because we have we believe in free trade, we believe in market forces, we do not interfere in business decisions, we have the necessary physical, educational, social infrastructure to ensure that businessmen can invest and invest confidently in Hong Kong, and more importantly, make money and take that money out of Hong Kong. So yes, we see Hong Kong very much as a hub of doing business, not only investing in Hong Kong in its own right, as a gateway to doing business with China, but also as a gateway to doing business in the entire East Asian region.
Do you see then a rapprochement between China and Taiwan, with Hong Kong serving as kind of the focal point?
The Chinese have made it quite clear that their wish is to reunite Hong Kong and Taiwan with the motherland. I think the Chinese have a great deal at stake in making the Hong Kong formula work. That is the one country, two system concept. And if that works, then I'm sure there's much better chance of convincing Taiwan that it should go down the same road.
What will be the impact on the reversion of Hong Kong to China on countries in Southeast Asia, including Vietnam?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite
yeah.
catch that question.
when Hong Kong, you said that there was a lot of, that Hong Kong is serving as a focal point for businessmen going to Vietnam. And when Hong Kong reverts back into China, will that affect the trade in the economy in the places like Vietnam?
I'm very glad you asked that question. Perhaps I should make one or two points clear, which may not be very clear. Yes, Hong Kong reverts to China in terms of sovereignty. But Hong Kong will enjoy a very high degree of autonomy in the way that it conducts its own business, in its economic, financial, social systems. We will maintain our own currency, freely convertible. So it's not going to be, as it were, swallowed up by China. China is a sovereign power, and as a sovereign power, as with the current sovereign power, it will be responsible only for foreign relations, foreign affairs, and for defense purposes. In all other things, the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law promises a high degree of autonomy. The Chinese have made it abundantly clear that they will faithfully implement the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, and I am certain that they will keep this promise. So we're not going to be swallowed up by China, and I think Hong Kong will maintain its preeminent position as a gateway to doing business in this area, provided we continue to enjoy the freedoms that we currently have, that we have an independent judiciary, maintenance of rule of law, level playing field, and provided we continue to invest in our infrastructure, not only our physical infrastructure, but also infrastructure in terms of trained manpower and everything else that goes towards making the business environment friendly for people to invest.
Among those freedoms, of course, is freedom of religion, and China has from time to time persecuted the Christian church. Hong Kong affords religious freedom. What do you predict after 1997 regarding the free exercise of religion?
As with other freedoms that are guaranteed in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, I have no reason to doubt that there will be religious freedom. So I do not think that there is any worry on that account.
In 50 years' time, how do you see Hong Kong's role in Greater China? Is this, well, just leave it at that.
I should probably take issue with the definition of Greater China.
Okay.
It is true that our economic links with China are growing by leaps and bounds and going from strength to strength. But it is important to stress that if we are to be in a position to exercise that high degree of autonomy promised to us in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, then it is absolutely imperative that we maintain ourselves as a separate economic entity and as a separate customs territory. That is the basis upon which we have entry into a number of international forums. For example, we are a member of GET in our own right because we are a separate customs territory. And that will be the position after 1997. Yes.
Okay. Well, foreign investment, as you have stated, is pouring into Hong Kong. China seems to be pouring huge sums into the development of Shanghai as an international trading center. Do you think that Shanghai's future will be brighter after 1997 than Hong Kong's, since the real decisions will be made in Beijing?
Shanghai is enjoying very strong economic growth together with Guangdong. That is because it's opened itself up to investments from not only from Hong Kong, but from America and from Taiwan and elsewhere. And I have no doubt that it will, in the course of time, be in a very strong position to conduct its own trade and to have dealings with the outside. But we do not see really Shanghai as acting in competition with Hong Kong. In a country as vast as China, there must be plenty of scope and opportunity for major business centers, whether it is Hong Kong, Guangdong, or Shanghai. And let's not forget that in terms of our pace of development, we are streaks ahead of Shanghai. And if you just look at the GDP of Shanghai compared with Hong Kong, it will be many, many decades before they catch up with Hong Kong. And of course, Hong Kong is not standing still.
We are about out of time. Before asking the final question, I'd just like to remind you, of course, that transcripts, audio and videotapes are available by calling 1-800-500-9911. And I would like to present you, Mr. Chan, with a certificate of appreciation for being here. And it is usually customary that we present a mug, National Press Club mug. It was noted last week when we gave out those mugs. Senator Baucus turned it over and said, "This mug is made in China."
Oh. You should have one made in Hong Kong.
Therefore, he said that that mug, of course, stated his policy, backed up his policy of free trade with China. Anyway, unfortunately, we are out of those mugs. We gave the last two away, and I guess it's the proverbial slow boat from China. We haven't gotten our new shipment in. So I would like to present you with this book of Herb Block cartoons, which, of course, is the next best thing to a National Press Club mug. It's even better.
Yes.
Because it is signed by the cartoonist Herb Block, who's of the Washington Post and has been lampooning American political leaders from Roosevelt to Clinton. And you get something there to chuckle over on the flight back to Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad you ran out of mugs. Thank you.
There is, of course, one final question, though, which is, how did you get to Hong Kong from Shanghai?
How did I get to it? As I recollect, on a slow boat in 1948.
Well, thank you very much for coming. And that concludes.